In graduate school in the 80s, I was doing a degree in spirituality and psychology, and I went on a fellowship to Sri Lanka, India, and Nepal. And in Sri Lanka, they have the more Theravada Buddhist studies, which is where most of what we know as mindfulness comes from. So insight meditation, the four foundations of mindfulness. So I went, studied in the university, went to some of the monasteries and meditation centers. I practiced some of the 5-day retreats and did 10-day silent retreats, and really enjoyed kind of the benefits of what most of you know as mindfulness. So how many people have practiced some kind of mindfulness meditation? Yeah, so you have a sense of that. So the word mindfulness is, because it's so predominant that it is from the Theravada with a little Zen, when you say mindfulness, you're really talking about what I call deliberate mindfulness. And what I'm going to talk about is a different style or a different approach of mindfulness. So what happened was, after Sri Lanka, I went up through India and actually ended up in Dharamsala, where a group of us met with the Dalai Lama in one of his audiences. And he was just about to give a talk in France for the first time on something called Dzogchen. Welcome.
Hi. Is anybody sitting there?
So this Dzogchen technique, he was very enthusiastic about. It was kind of a direct practice approach in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes called Mahamudra as well. And I put my hand up and I said, who should I go study with? And he said, there's a guy in Nepal named Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. So I said, okay, changed my plans, got in a bus, got in a car, got on a yak, up I went to Nepal, and up to this small little house that he was living in with a meeting with some students. And he gave about a 15-minute talk, and then he gave what's called a pointing out instruction, which is simply a way of shifting your awareness. And in that 3 minutes, I felt the same way I did at the end of a 10-day retreat. Just as calm, but actually more bright, more alert, more loving, more interconnected, more free of worry and anxiety in my body. I really started to kind of spontaneously laugh, and I couldn't believe that this was possible, that it was so present, that it was this far away, that it happened in a moment. And so this was my introduction to what he called effortless mindfulness. So effortless mindfulness, the premise that I write about in this book, is that that which we're seeking, that's called awakening, freedom from suffering, a sense of interconnection, joy, love, is already inherently within each of us. And it doesn't need to be developed like a technique. It literally just needs to be glimpsed. And then even for the first moment, there's a sense of freedom, a sense of looking back almost through the looker, relaxing or opening to that which is already aware by itself. And when we're aware from there, it kind of opens up this panoramic view. Feels like we drop from head to heart-mind, and we feel this sense of what's called a flow state. So we're not just passively in a meditation state that's removed. You literally feel the way that most of us feel when we do the thing we most love in our free time. So the premise is that what you do, like walking in nature, gardening, some sports, going to the mountains, dance, is to give you a little glimpse of what it's like to drop out of this small separate sense of self and into a more embodied, interconnected, awareness-based flow consciousness. And that flow consciousness is kind of a glimpse of something that we all know and that is naturally installed within us. And so it's not just getting a meditation experience, it's literally that we're shifting operating systems, that we're changing not what we're aware of, but really where we're aware from. And when that happens, that can happen naturally or with the discovery of what I call local awareness, which is kind of identified or attached to this thought-based little feeling of me that's listening now. Yeah, if you get a sense of where are you hearing from, where are you listening to me from, and instead of looking at the object, you start to feel back toward the ordinary subject, the organized habit of orienting toward creating a I think, therefore I am feeling. If that feeling is trying to solve the problem of satisfaction, trying to solve the problem of happiness, trying to, from a thought-based little sense of self, solve the problem of what do I do in order to relieve suffering. And so, in a moment, if you were just to inquire and just let that little problem solver relax and kind of feel what's here by inquiring what's here now if there's no problem to solve. Instead of looking to thought or going to sleep, what do you notice that you're aware of, that you're aware from, and what kind of qualities, what's the feeling of being here? It's different than it was 10 minutes ago, 1 minute ago. So anyone want to say a quality or a...
It's sort of like a paradigm shift. It's, I came late, that, was kind of,
Yep.
a bit in a rush.
Yeah.
And, but I think I'm pretty much, in the state of being.
Yeah. So a paradigm shift into a state of being. A being that doesn't have to do to be, doesn't have to think to be, but could think, just like could move your hand from being, could think, but then as soon as you don't need to think functionally, there's an intelligence that has the ability to perceive and respond and relate and create, whose baseline is peace of mind, open heart, freedom from the chattering mind, but not dumbed down, not spaced out, literally more embodied, more open-hearted, and able to feel a kind of connection and a relief. Yeah? Anyone else want to say? What's the quality?
Spacious.
Spacious. Anyone else feel that spacious quality? Openness? So it's literally a dimensional feeling that's usually one of the markers. That feels small, separate, subject, object, and then drop. Open mind.
Vividness.
What is it?
Vividness.
Vividness. Yeah, so some kind of vividness or
Clarity.
clarity, because you're not looking to thought and looking through thought, as the interpreter, just direct perception that's kind of lit up from within, or just clearly perceives whatever is here, internally or externally? Clarity? Anybody else with clarity? What else do you notice? What's here now? What's this like? If you don't go to thought, there's no, so there's immediate calm. It's a certain kind of calm that's not like numb, right? It's actually a kind of a clear or vibrant calm, or a calm that has the potential to move or to do, or feels open and related, yeah? Not spaced out.
That will expansion like this, no limit.
Yes, so the expansion, that openness. Anyone else again with that expansion, like there's no limit? Openness. And then, so it's kind of like a feeling that you're aware of the openness, and then it's almost as if this open awareness, this spacious awareness, is where you're aware from, back to thoughts, feelings, sensations, this kind of feeling of interconnection and peace of mind, yeah, calm, receptive, responsive. So this premise that some of you may have experienced in a moment is the premise that this is literally what the foundation of awakening is. That it's that simple, that it's literally this simple move of moving from a small separate sense of self that's habitual to this dropped, open, spacious awareness that's already awake, that's dynamically aware from within, and aware as kind of an interconnected, more heart-mind. And just that training, just that discovery, moment by moment, and then the shift into this new identity, this new type of awareness-based mind, changes your whole view, changes your whole paradigm, changes your relationship to whatever the contents of consciousness are. So in some ways, deliberate mindfulness, you look at the contents, you look at the subjects that are going on, the experience is here, the experience is there. And in effortless, you start to become curious about who's looking, what it is, where are you aware from? And just by opening your view, that simple move of turning awareness around allows a new, upgraded consciousness to come on board. And in the studies they've done in studying flow state of people who are optimally functioning, they discover very similar types of markers, that there's not a small separate sense of self, that there's a sense of being connected to some greater intelligence that feels like you can operate or respond in a moment, that you're competent without looking to thought and creating a thinker, that you feel like you're connected to nature and all the people who you're with. And in that shift, the premise of this book, by looking at the wisdom traditions, looking at neuroscience that's been studying this recently, and then looking at psychology, there's a way that awakening can become the next natural stage of human development. That it's not just an experience of calming or de-stressing that's often emphasized in deliberate mindfulness, but it's literally an upgrading to the possibility of an awakened consciousness. More loving, more interconnected, more capacity for processing information quickly without burning out. So this is kind of the wisdom tradition secret, and then now it's been studied by some neuroscientists, and it shows that this kind of distracted mind kind of creates this balancing of this, what's called the default mode network of the brain. So there's a feeling as if you feel very much as if you're able to be aware inside what's going on, you're aware of what's going on outside. So it feels like a continuous, open field of interconnected peace that has this ability to process information and feels more loving and connected. So this book is that's the thesis, and then really what this is a guidebook. So what I did is I kind of studied with all the masters of these wisdom traditions, and I then applied some of the neuroscience and psychology, and then tested out the practices, and then kind of reverse engineered and filled in some of the gaps where they didn't give practices, and started to make kind of a easier, more contemporary version of what has been kind of a sacred hidden tradition for so many years. Many of the texts have only been translated in the last 10, 15 years from these ancient wisdom traditions, and there's almost a feeling from these masters they want people to learn them now because the times, we so need them in our times. This kind of awakened, more open-hearted, contemporary way of living that is not just passive, that doesn't need to be learned by going to a monastery or living in a cave, that this Mahamudra tradition, that one of these traditions has a history of people awakening in the midst of cities, in the midst of being, fish sellers and householders and living everyday lives, and then teaching each other and sharing these little ways of doing small glimpses many times during the day. So literally, this guidebook is teaching you how to do these 1 to 5 minute ways of literally unhooking awareness, having a drop from head to heart, feel embodied as if the awareness is aware from within, and then almost as if you're looking out of the eyes of your heart. So there's a sense of not having to be dominated by this chattering mind. You can live at home in your heart mind and use Wi-Fi to the files in the office of your head. Yeah, so you stay home and you don't have to live in your office and always be working, night and day. You can really come home and through these kind of series of practices, I introduce you to these 5 kind of levels of consciousness that have been traditionally talked about in all these wisdom traditions, are now starting to be studied, and then include kind of a way to deal with the emotional body and the emotions and the subpersonality aspect, so that we can become embodied and live in a world with some of what we've learned from psychology, as well as neuroscience, as well as wisdom traditions. 5-day retreat in Italy, and people who were there had, tremendous kind of awakenings, and this kind of joyous connection to each other. A lot of laughter, a lot of sense of freedom. So it's not like this tradition of meditation where you withdraw and you shut your emotions down. It's that you feel like you become yourself, and that when you do, you're not so self-conscious. You're able to relate to other people and have fun and laugh and experience connection to nature and to each other in a way that is very fresh and really needed in our culture today. So, this, not only is this thesis from these wisdom traditions that this awakening is available to each of us, is already inherent within us, can be accessed in moments through small glimpses, but then I kind of give some very practical methods and glimpse practices that go kind of through different doorways for different kind of learners, for people who learn in different ways. So this is the hope that we can all kind of join together in this kind of simple but advanced practices that are now available to live a more open-hearted, more flow-conscious life that's awake and motivated to spread healing and health and happiness to all people. So thank you very much for that.
You know, I still feel that I'm, you know, very calm. But I have a very logical mind, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I of all people would need this because I do a lot of quantitative analysis
Okay.
in my job. But I can't figure out at which point did I slip into, you know, this state of mind. It was either something you said, but you
Yeah.
know, I don't really care at this point.
Yeah, but it's
when I'm reading the
important.
book, I think I'd like to know how to access that.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Many of us access this unintentionally, or we kind of know what we did. It's like, oh, well, I really love to go bicycle riding. Oh, I really love to go to that place in nature and walk my dog. And then you start, you know, get out of the car with the dog and you walk your dog, and then all of a sudden you get into, you know, a couple feet into the forest, and then all of a sudden you drop, you connect, and then you're like, here I am. But you don't know how you did that. You just know if you do that, it will happen. And so what this is saying you can do that, continue to do that in the way you do it naturally, but you can learn the principles of how to do that so you can do it on the tube and not just in the most beautiful, quiet spot. Because that peace is within you, it's not in the woods. So this is the thing. This is your consciousness that opens when it's supported externally, but if you know how to support it and navigate your consciousness internally, you can drop and feel the same way you do on a beach in the middle of a busy city like London or New York, where I come from. Yeah, so he mentioned that he wondered whether it seems like it's available in any moment, and he had read a book on having no head by Douglas Harding, a British author, who discovered similarly these ways of naturally accessing, particularly the deconstructing or the looking through of the point of view. And so I used some of his methods for the stage 1 to 2, and then once you look through and you feel as if you're not looking from your head, but almost as if awareness kind of can look back, then sometimes that can lead to a kind of an embodiment, but I kind of add that you look back through, and now you're aware of where you're aware from in a new way, and now you feel you're aware and embodied from the new operating system, so that you can intentionally let go, open up, and then find the solution as quickly as you kind of deconstruct the problem. And this really helps because a lot of meditation systems that go more gradually actually there's studies now that show you can, when you deconstruct the sense of self or the ego slowly, like just by sitting, you can get flooded by your unconscious because you have no ego, and then you have no ego defenses. So this method is literally to leave the first operating system and discover the more loving, capable, embracing, intelligent sense of who you are, so that if anything arises, it's met from even a greater capacity. And so this gives you an immediate sense of seeing through to no self, but then discovering kind of this bigger sense of self that includes your ordinary everyday life. Yeah. So she's saying that she's played with this kind of Douglas Harding, and that just saying that, well, that's 1 and 2, that she kind of, it's what's called getting it and losing it. So you get a little sense of freedom, but then there's like a magnetic pull back to the first habit, which is so strong. So if you just deconstruct or just go to don't know mind, then as soon as you try to function or talk or walk, you're going to have to come back to some operating system. So you come back to this small sense of self. So what we're doing is literally upgrading, looking through the old one, realizing this is just a mental pattern, getting a relief of just being aware of space, and then kind of realizing that you can be aware from space back to include sensation, energy, interconnection, intelligence, that now has what's called an open mind or an open heart, that you're not only aware of, but you're realize it's kind of already been aware by itself, and then you're aware from it back to this kind of flow. And almost everyone has experienced moments like that in your life. You just call it different things. Some sense of being embodied in a flow, whether it's in nature or in sports or in something. But the key is that's not a state, that's not an altered state, that's actually your natural state. And this is the altered state that we walk around in. So we're trying to get out of the altered state that we're struggling and suffering from, and literally just grow to the next level of development or evolution, which is already installed and available. And these are kind of a set of instructions and practices that have been checked from wisdom traditions and from now neuroscience and psychology to try to help us as a group and community and world to really just learn how to do it without, and then if you have spiritual or religious beliefs, you can add it to them and it matches as, but if you don't, you can just do it from a consciousness point of view. So whatever your beliefs, you're welcome to keep them. There's nothing needs to be believed, and yet you start to navigate your own consciousness, and then when you realize this vast interconnection, you can call it the universe or life or God or spirit or whatever it feels like, but it has an effect of higher functioning, more love, sense of freedom and peace, and it just changes the root of suffering. So she asked, what is the default state from here? Is like embodied bliss, but it's also not, so embodied isn't just in this body, it's almost like interconnected bliss. So embodied is in the body, like feeling body from within, but also feeling interconnected bliss, as if everything's lit up and blissful, that the energy is almost just a little blissful. Like the most intense bliss you've ever had, just spread it out throughout the universe, and that's kind of the...
Like a radiating.
Like a radiating, but it's not just coming from you, it's almost the nature of the quantum field when it comes into particles and waves. It's kind of dancing, and then from the ocean of awareness, you're rising like a wave, and then everyone else is like a wave. And so you're interconnected and feeling supported by this feeling of safety, which is actually feels more safe than feeling tight and separate and scanning for danger. You feel open but porous in some way, so that information, energy doesn't stick when it comes to you. It kind of goes right through you, but you feel very buoyant and open-hearted. I mean, they could be, but it's interesting that people come with, beliefs, and then I just say, well, just notice this, drop, open, let go, be here, call that whatever you want. Now as that, notice that you're also here and interconnected. And they go like, oh my God, because we're all the same human consciousness, regardless of our culture, belief, history, then you're welcome to stay within whatever belief or supports or cultures or family you want to. But just to emphasize, shouldn't be a hindrance. I mean, there were 4 people on this retreat who never had been on a retreat before, and they were able to get what has been traditionally said, this is advanced practices is only for people who have done 20 years of meditation. And they had done no meditation, and they got it. So this is my premise, is that it doesn't require long, arduous training in order to access what's naturally available. It's just kind of more like feeling it and getting to know it, almost like riding a bicycle. It's not an intellectual learning, it's a feeling of where are you aware from, and then training to remain, and then losing it, going back to the old operating system, and then learning to return, and then walking and talking from here in a way that's so much more free and loving, and then almost like a stage of human growth. You just, in some amount of time that's different for everyone, you just start to become living from here, from this, what's been called awakened consciousness, that's been kind of thought of as only for the advanced practitioner. And in fact, in working as a therapist with colleagues of mine, we've worked with people inpatient with complex trauma and outpatient, and we've discovered ways that not only are they able to access this awareness, but it's exactly what they need. They're aware of the part that's hurting themselves or part that doesn't want to hurt themselves, and then they're asked, well, who's aware of both those parts? And they say, well, I am. And where are you located? Well, I'm everywhere. And I'm here. And how do you feel toward those parts of you that have been causing so much? And they cry, or they say, wow, I feel like there's hope. So this kind of just simple way of doing this inquiry of who am I, or what am I, or what I often emphasize is where am I aware from? And just this shift opens up kind of a knot of consciousness that we've taken for granted, that goes up, thought goes to thought, creates a thinker, looks out subject-object, looks out subject-object. As soon as that opens and drops, as we do when we walk in nature, you feel connected and safe and functional in this new way that's been called, it's what all the wise gals and wise guys have reported as pretty good. Yeah. So the first thing is that when you shift into, so rather than having to do the thing like sport or play music or something that you've done 10,000 hours of to enter the flow state because you don't have to think about it, the first thing you do is shift into the flow state, just staying here right now. Then you're in the flow state. Then you do something that you've done 10,000 hours of, which is walk, talk, type. So in other words, you've already done your common everyday activity that you do most of the things you do. So you start to match it up and rewire your neuronal network into learning to shift into the flow, then walk, then don't just sit, then talk, then use language, which you've done 10,000 hours of. So you kind of do it backwards. And then you start to learn how to do it with new activities.
What does that do?
I mean, the first thing is to kind of get into the new support of the almost what I'm calling flow state, but that's kind of a secular or a kind of a a common
Buzzword.
starting point, yeah, of what this is like. It's actually awakened consciousness. So when you get more into the awakened consciousness, the new thing just looks like, whoa, what is this? This is cool. You know, just like, oh, wow, okay. And there's just like a, almost like wisdom, childlike interest in like what's happening and what you're learning and what's going on. And but there's a confidence and a safety and a sense of trust. Yeah, yeah. So there's a excuse me. There's a bunch of neuroscience markers that seem to, when you do these practices, so novices who do these practices or people who have been doing them for a while, the left and right will communicate better. What's called kind of the default mode network, which are kind of two networks in the brain. One goes out, what's going on out here, then the next one comes on, what's going on here. And the reason why we get distracted all the time, those two networks, that even like when you try to watch your breath, the reason you get distracted is because you're doing this task, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the other network comes on and takes you out. So it balances these two internal, external networks so you feel whole. You feel like, everyone feels like, oh, I feel whole, or I feel seamless. And then the self-referencing part of the brain quiets down, so you don't have this not only chatter, but this self-commentary relaxes. And then this kind of creative part called gamma waves in the brain, not just the calm waves from alpha to beta, but this gamma, which is what comes on momentary when you have like aha moments, starts to be almost perpetual aha feeling. And then the aha turns into ha-ha. And that's my final word.